Good afternoon and welcome to this month's Lunch with the Libraries and Museums. It's the ongoing speaker series that spotlights the unique collections, pioneering initiatives, and outstanding staff of the Sheridan Libraries and University Museums. My name is Claire Miller, President of the Friends Advisory Council. The Friends of the Libraries are one of the oldest university library support groups in the United States. Since 1931, we have provided financial support, advocacy, and volunteer assistance to ensure that the libraries remain one of the university's strongest assets, the heart of intellectual life at Hopkins. Our conversation today will once again focus on the library's Adopt a Book program, which allows fellow book lovers to adopt recent library acquisitions by underwriting their costs. This ever-growing collection of books and ephemera enhances the classroom experience and creates new opportunities for research by students and professors at Hopkins. Your sponsorship helps our library grow its research collections, preserve treasures for future generations, and share these rare materials with the world online. Joining us today to showcase more of the interesting, beautiful, and rare items in this collection are Sam Bessen, Jennifer Jarvis, Don Judas, Liz Mengel, and Max Zalen. Thank you again for joining us, and I hope you enjoy the program.
Good afternoon. My name is Sam Bessen, and I'm the Eleanor and Lester Levy Family Curator of Sheet Music and Popular Culture. I have two items I'm really excited to share with you today, and the first one is this autographed photo of Julian Elting. Now, Elting was a self-described female impersonator in the vaudeville era and was actually at the time one of the most highly paid performers anywhere on stage. His original name was William Dalton. He was born in 1881 outside of Boston. And he was a stage kid from a very young age. He was even entered into baby shows by his mother. Now, his father moved the family to Butte, Montana when he was very young, where he fell in love with performing. And he also met some new neighbors named the Eltings, which is where he actually took his stage name from. Now, to clear this up, Elting is spelled E-L-T-I-N-G-E, which has historically caused many people to pronounce it Eltinge, but in a line that predates Liza Minnelli's Liza with a Z by about 50 years, Elting insisted it was Elting with a G, not Eltinge with a J. Now, the family eventually moved back to Boston, where Elting began performing as a woman in small musical productions, but he quickly found that audiences adored his performances, and he made his way quickly to vaudeville in New York City, where he would perform maybe 10 to 12-minute variety show sets where he would showcase different female characters and costumes before dramatically pulling off his wig at the end to surprise the audience and reportedly dismay the men in the audience that this beautiful woman was actually one of them the whole time. By historic accounts, it seems like Elting also arrived in vaudeville at kind of the perfect time. Vaudeville was originally known for being quite raunchy, unruly audiences, unruly performers, but theater owners were trying their best to raise revenue by making vaudeville a bit more family-friendly. So rather than portraying a campy or raunchy character, Elting saw female impersonation as a highly refined and an art form, really. He took it incredibly seriously. And in that way, he was able to join vaudeville as a clean act. Now, Elting found so much success, he was soon making upwards of $350 to $450 per week, when the average vaudevillian was making only about $40. He also made his way onto popular sheet music covers, like these from the Lester Levy sheet music collection. Here you can see Elting's face takes up pretty much the entire sheet, whereas here, Elting is essentially in drag with only her face superimposed onto this character, while at the bottom, you can see a photo of Julian Elting out of costume. Now, Elting's career expanded to other mediums like film. He even did a tour with a minstrel production put on by George M. Cohan in which he performed in blackface. Now, his career took a turn during the Great Depression, which affected the entire entertainment industry, And it suffered even further during the eventual cultural and legal crackdowns on female impersonation, which would extend well past his death in 1941 and into the 1960s. So there are many aspects of Elting's legacy that are still up for debate, but the main one is, of course, his sexuality. Despite his stage persona, Elting was actually a very private person off stage. And while there are many rumors about his sexuality, there are actually no documented relationships with men or women. So while he's not very well known today, I think Elting provides a really unique lens with which to study not only the origins of drag and queer performance in the United States, but early 20th century intersections of culture and race and masculinity and gender as a whole. So if you'd like to learn more about Elting, there was actually a biography of him released just last year. It's called Beautiful by Andrew Erdman. So moving on to the second historic object I wanted to share with you today, and this belonged to Sarah Vaughan. Now, Sarah Vaughan was, of course, an iconic jazz singer. She rose to fame in New York City after performing at the Apollo Theater in Harlem, and her career lasted an amazing 40 years, which spanned several genres. But in the 1980s, she became particularly fond of works by the composer George Gershwin. Now, she had already released an album called Sarah Vaughan Sings George Gershwin in 1958, but she released another called Gershwin Live in 1982, with Michael Tilson Thomas conducting the Los Angeles Philharmonic. For this album, Vaughan actually won the Grammy Award for Best Jazz Vocal Performance, and if you haven't heard this album, I'd highly recommend it. The orchestra does a fantastic job of following Vaughan because she's a jazz singer. She takes a lot of jazzy artistic liberties with the tunes, and I'm sure it was not easy for a 150-person orchestra to follow her, but Michael Tilson Thomas does a really great job bridging the two. Now, often when items from pop culture icons like Sarah Vaughan go up for sale, you'll see things like a lot of rare photographs, like the one we just saw from Julian Elting, maybe a musical instrument, or an article of clothing they wore at an iconic performance, or even sometimes something unusually specific like 15 pairs of false eyelashes owned by Liza Minnelli, which you can actually buy right now. But my favorite historic objects are ones that provide insights into the creative and artistic process of that person, which brings me to this rather unassuming red notebook. Now, this notebook was used and owned by Sarah Vaughan, and it contains her handwritten lyrics to several Gershwin songs and medleys of songs that she put together. So it's not exactly clear when this notebook was used. Vaughan sang these Gershwin medleys many times, especially in the 80s, so it may have been something she used just in rehearsal or during a recording session, or maybe as a tool to help her memorize the lyrics. I reached out to the Los Angeles Philharmonic Archives. They do have some photos of Vaughan and Michael Tilson Thomas in rehearsal for the Gershwin Live album, but the notebook unfortunately is not shown in those photos. And there's even a video you can find on YouTube of Sarah and Michael rehearsing at the piano together, and she's holding some sheet music with the lyrics. Unfortunately, again, not this notebook. But I do tend to think it's unlikely that objects like these were used in an actual performance, because we don't often see singers, especially jazz singers, singing off a music stand with a notebook, right? They tend to have the music memorized. Or maybe, if anything, they might have a screen at the foot of the stage that has the lyrics. I did find a review of one of Vaughan's performances in 1988 in which the reviewer noted that she sang a song, the words of which she had yet to memorize. So it's unclear to me if the reviewer there is implying that maybe she forgot the words or that she used a written aid like this one. We also know that Vaughan played piano, so it is possible she may have placed this on the piano stand so she didn't have to perform both the piano and the vocal parts from memory. But again, in the videos I've seen of Vaughan playing piano, she is playing from memory. There's not a mention or no music or lyrics on the stand. So as you look through this notebook, you'll find a lot of words have been crossed out. You'll find some changes, but there's one in particular that caught my eye, and it's this one here from a medley of the song Swanee by Gershwin and Strike Up the Band. Now, Swanee was, of course, made famous by Al Jolson. It was later sung quite a bit by Judy Garland. And there's a word in here that it looks like Sarah may have changed. And that word is the word mammy. Now, of course, this word goes back to the minstrel tradition when it was a racist caricature and a trope. And it appears as if Sarah actually changed the A to an O to get away from the original word and change to the word mommy. Now, if you listen to the recording of Gershwin Live with Michael Tilson Thomas, she actually does sing the original word, but she sort of turns it on its head a little bit. She pauses before saying the word, she over-enunciates it, and then laughs immediately afterwards, almost like she's making fun of this outdated word. So it's clear that this book was used as part of her creative process and to kind of grapple with certain particular lyrics. Thank you so much again for joining us. I hope you enjoyed learning about these objects as much as I did. I look forward to answering any questions you have in the Q&A.
Hello, my name is Max Zalen, and I'm the librarian for classics, comparative thought and literature, Jewish studies, and modern languages and literatures here in the Sheridan Libraries at Johns Hopkins University. I'm excited to talk to you about several items I've proposed for this year's iteration of Adopt a Book, all of which touch upon the academic fields I represent in ways that I find intriguing and meaningful, and in ways that I hope you will find intriguing and meaningful as well. Joining the holdings of special collections in the Sheridan Libraries this past year is an extraordinary reproduction of an extraordinary work, a recently published fine facsimile of Vaticanus Latinus 3868, better known as the Vatican Terence. This exact reproduction of the famous 9th century Carolingian manuscript now held in the Vatican is famous not only as an important annotated textual witnesses to the 6 surviving comedies of the ancient Roman playwright Terence, it is also renowned the world over for its stunning illustrations. These include a likeness of Terence himself, a collection of masks which show some of the characters that the play is recorded within, together with many, in fact 150 miniatures, which depict the action of the plays throughout and which deliberately harken back to ancient Roman dress. Since arriving in special collections earlier this spring, this fine facsimile, the Vatican Terence, has already been used extensively in teaching and research with both graduates and undergraduates, and will continue to feature prominently in teaching and research here at Hopkins for generations to come. Next, we have 3 beautiful handmade 18th century broadsides from northern Italy, which commemorate and celebrate the weddings of 2 Jewish couples, Isaac Virolengo and Grazia Navarro, and Moise Vita Cohen and Consola Cohen. Isaac and Grazia are lauded in Hebrew verses, and Moise and Consola are feted in Hebrew and Italian verses. This one is my favorite of the 3 in the middle, which elegantly juxtaposes the union of Moise and Consola with the union of Isaac and Rebekah as told in Genesis 24 in the Bible. Broadsides like these are examples of ephemeral works made for specific moments in time which rarely survive beyond their initial publication. Though much research remains to be done on these broadsides, the fact that I have so far been unable to find these poems in other libraries suggests that they may represent unique survivals from early modern Italy. Even if other witnesses are eventually found in other libraries, Hopkins copies are still exceedingly scarce and important glimpses into a world which has long since faded into memory. These 3 works will join other broadsides at the Virginia Fox Stern Center for the History of the Book in the Renaissance here at Hopkins, where they will doubtlessly attract a wide range of scholars and students in Jewish studies, Italian, and many other areas of the humanities. One of the things I like about this broadside so much is that it shows in the center the traditional Kohanic blessing, the blessings of the priestly caste, the Cohens. You can see this gesture here. This is interesting in that the surnames of the bride and groom are also Cohens, so it's very fitting. And if you're a Star Trek fan, you will see actually the basis of the Vulcan salute here in the traditional Kohanic blessing. Leonard Nimoy was very influenced by Orthodox ritual, so we can actually see this centuries later reflected in this broadside. Joining other art books and special collections published by the famous Arion Press in San Francisco, which proudly claims to be the only printer in the United States to make books entirely by hand from comma to cover under one roof, is this new and irresistible edition of the Fables of Aesop. One of only 250 copies designated for sale, this signed letterpress production features 15 original relief prints by 15 different artists, each of whom offers their own unique take on the timeless fables of Aesop, as translated from the Greek by Reverend George Filer Townsend and Vernon Stanley Jones, and is accompanied by the morals of Daniel Handler, aka Lemony Snicket. My favorite illustration is probably that of Natalie Frank, which accompanies the 15th fable, The Cat and Venus, with its playful yet poignant reflection on anthropomorphism, complete with iridescent eyes. In keeping with the often jocular tone of the fables, the presentation box contains silver bells, which ring whenever it is moved. a sly allusion to the second fable of the set, The Cat and the Bell, wherein a group of mice resolve to bell a cat to warn them of its approach, but stop short when they fail to agree, unsurprisingly, who exactly should undertake the dangerous task of belling the cat. A handsome companion volume rounds out a work that is sure to fascinate and inspire. Next is a signed presentation copy of Arthur Kolnick's 20 woodcut engravings inspired by the accompanying short story, Migrations of a Melody, by one of the giants of Yiddish literature, Yudlam and Peretz. Printed in Paris barely 3 years after the end of the Second World War, Kolnick's edition of Peretz's Migrations of a Melody is true to its source's fascination with transformation, inasmuch as the woodcuts offer an arresting series of meditations on changes to Jewish life that alternates between the sentimental and the sobering. Thus, while Kolnick's depictions of traditional shtetl life in Eastern Europe sometimes evoke the work of other artists like Marc Chagall, his depictions of the horrors of the camps where his family was murdered strike a very different tone. Together, these engravings mark a style that is entirely Kolnick's own, and a deeply compelling one at that. The typography of Kolnick's edition is equally impressive, which, when combined with the engravings, give this production a bespoke feel that has already enriched Hopkins' formidable holdings in Yiddish literature. The last item I will invite you to consider today is not a recent acquisition. It actually has long been a part of the Lawrence Hall Fowler collection of architectural history at the John Work Garrett Library, Evergreen, James Stewart's monumental work, The Antiquities of Athens. Printed in London beginning in 1762, the volumes which comprise Stewart's work were carefully informed by his study with Nicholas Revet in Greece between 1751 and 1753 under the sponsorship of the British Society of Dilettanti, which was keen to provide correct guides to its members, many of whom were alumni of the Grand Tour of the European continent and so were deeply concerned with the physical remains of Greek and Roman culture. Often considered the first reliable source book for classical Greek architecture, The Antiquities of Athens is as much a guide to classical Athens as it is to Ottoman Athens in the 18th century. It is exceedingly rare to find these two worlds depicted so faithfully and so beautifully side by side, as in, for instance, this beautiful image that we have here, in which you can see the Acropolis and the Parthenon. I discussed this with a first-year seminar earlier this year, and it was very, indeed, illuminating. These contrasts are essential for teaching and research in person here at Hopkins, which is why I'm proposing that the binding for our copy of the Antiquities of Athens, which has long since passed its prime, be conserved. I hope you've enjoyed this brief overview and that you'll come to peruse these items in person in special collections. In the meantime, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have later in the Q&A.
Okay, hi, my name is Jennifer Jarvis. I'm a conservator for the Sheridan Libraries, and I'm going to be talking to you about the conservation treatment and some of the important material characteristics of this book. Mac has already spoken to you about the historical importance of the volume and how it's going to be used in the classroom once it has been treated in the conservation lab. So this is a high-end book. It would have been very expensive to produce, and it would have been expensive to purchase. Mac might have mentioned already that this book was produced on a subscription basis, meaning basically people would have pre-ordered the volume and advanced that money so that the publisher and printer and so forth could be guaranteed the income. And so in those cases, usually books were kind of on the higher end of the market. And what I'm going to do now is look at a few of the physical characteristics of the book that kind of demonstrate that this is a luxurious book. So if you look down here at the paper first, you'll see that it has some staining now from over the years, but it is a creamy off-white color. It's a heavy linen rag paper and very high quality paper, not brittle at all, still in excellent condition. Where you do see, let me see if I can find some text. Here, you will see that there are very wide margins around the illustrations and around the text, meaning that it's kind of a display of opulence, that you wouldn't have cut this down and recycled the scraps of paper. So already just from looking at the pages of the book, you can see that this was a high quality book that, again, was pretty fancy for the time period. And now I am going to close it, and we're going to talk about the cover. All right, so first let's look, now that the book is closed, if you look at the edges of the book, you'll see all of the gilding on all edges of the book, all three edges. So this would actually be gold leaf, whereas later in the 19th and 20th century, you would have had some imitation gold. So this is real gold. And then if you look really closely here at the edge under what would have been the end bands, there is some further detailing, which would have been some tooling into the gold. So kind of a further extra step taken by the binders, just to, again, demonstrate luxury. So then if we look at the cover of the book, from a distance, it's not going to look like much. It looks like any other ordinary brown leather binding from this time period. But once we zoom in, there's a few characteristics that I want to point out that make this leather very special. So first, you can kind of see that it's a reddish brown tone. And when you open the book inside and you see this more pristine edge of the leather, that reddish tone really pops out a little bit more at you. And then you will also see, in addition to the gold tooling on the cover that pops out at you and you notice immediately, once you come closer, you'll see this more subtle cross-hatching pattern. And then finally, there's one other thing that you can do. You can take a little smell of the leather. It's faded now, but you can kind of detect a slightly medicinal or botanical smell. So all of these things taken together indicate, though I can't confirm 100% yet, the presence of something called Russia leather, or also called Russia calf. As the name implies, this leather was imported from Russia, from around St. Petersburg, it's believed. And this leather has a lot of really interesting characteristics. Normally, leather, it comes from younger animals, which makes the skin supple and easy to work with, but not necessarily super durable, especially for large volumes. Russia calf was made with slightly older animals, so the skins were thicker, and usually that would make a leather that is tough and hard to work with. It dulls your knife. It's very undesirable as a craft material. But the way that the leather manufacturers in Russia made this leather using locally available tannins, mostly from willow and birch trees. And then after the leather was cured and tanned, they came in with a really special oil extracted from the birch tree and a layer of seal fat. And what the birch oil extract in particular did was, what we think it did was help soften the leather, make it really supple and easy to work with. And also it imbued the leather with natural antifungal and insecticidal properties. So bindings that were covered in Russia calf were really resistant to mold damage and resistant to insect damage. So because it was imported from Russia and had all these special properties associated with it, it was expensive to purchase and then therefore expensive to put on your book bindings. But this is another indication, all of these things put together, that tells us that this was a really important special book to whoever purchased it. Okay, and one more thing about this leather is because it was known to be so high quality and so desirable, fashionable as well, there were a lot of imitations of Russia leather, Russia calf, that cropped up around this time, so around the late 18th century or last quarter of the 18th century into the 19th century. And excitingly, in the last 10 years or so, scientists have been able to use various non-destructive and microdestructive techniques to increase their certainty that what they're looking at is in fact Russia calf and not just another leather that has been dyed and kind of hatched like this to look like Russia calf. And that's through analysis to kind of locate those birch tannins and birch extract within the leather. So our Heritage Science for Conservation Lab, which is located within the Conservation Lab, is run by Dr. Patty McGuigan, and she and her students will take a sample of this leather that we can easily take a small sample of during conservation treatment and give it to them, and in order to run some tests to see if it's more likely than not that we have Russia leather. Looking at it, I do think it is, but it's always nice to have that confirmation for the historical record. So as far as our treatment goes, we really want to preserve all of this original material as much as possible and just kind of bring the book back to life and show for students, faculty, and researchers how special and important this book is. So we will reattach these boards that have come loose and stick the leather back down here that's lifted in such a way that we're not losing what's already here, and we're introducing as little new material as possible. And we will do whatever other repairs that we need to do to make the book suitable for use and exhibition in the future. And I think that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Donald Judas, the librarian for Film and Media Studies, and I'm joined by Liz Mengel, the Associate Dean of Collections and Academic Services. She and I have been working on a very interesting and uncommon gift, the collection of the Academic Film Archive of North America. This historic archive of educational film has been collected and curated thoughtfully by Jeff Alexander. He had been looking for a home for these films, and thanks to his connection with Adam Rogers, a faculty member and previous director of the Film and Media Studies program, Jeff decided that we are the perfect home for his incredibly interesting and historic collection. The collection comprises thousands of reels of film that were used in classrooms across the country, spanning many topics from ancient Greece, comets, Shakespeare and the Ice Age, to canoe building and silk weaving, and many more subjects taught in schools for decades. In addition to the film reels, study guides, and other printed ephemera, Jeff strategically digitized and made a subset of these films available through the Internet Archive. So in addition to providing a safe harbor for the physical collection, Hopkins also needs to continue Jeff's strategy to digitize meaningful portions of this very eclectic corpus.
Thanks, Don. As soon as we met Jeff and talked to him about this collection, we knew it was something we wanted for JHU. However, there certainly were more challenges to getting it here than one would think. First, roughly 7,600 films in metal cans are heavy, so transportation was much more of an issue than we expected. We would need a big truck, and at one point when we calculated the total weight, the shipping company thought we might actually need 2 trucks. We were also worried about transporting the films from San Jose to California in the middle of the summer, where temperatures across the country could be high, and as we knew it would take several days to move the films, we did not want the film to be sitting in a hot truck. We also discovered that the cost of a refrigerator truck was well beyond our funding, so far beyond it. So once we settled on a 53-foot trailer, we found a time when the temperature in San Jose, then moving across the country, and in Baltimore was relatively similar. We chose early November, which is fairly cool across the country, and there is usually little chance of snow that might cause transportation issues. However, we were fortunate the truck did run into a freak snowstorm in the Midwest, so more problems. Eventually, the film arrived in Baltimore in JHU's Library Services Center. So the second thing to know is that film is a little bit more delicate than you might imagine, and older films, even more so. Much like us, as we age, things can happen to film as it gets older. Probably the most prevalent issue in film-based degradation is known as vinegar syndrome. Vinegar syndrome is the first sign that the film is going bad. After that, the signs are shrinkage, embrittlement, and buckling of the gelatin emulsion off the cellulose acetate plastic base. Storage in warm and humid conditions accelerates the onset of decay. Once the decay begins in earnest, the remaining life of the film is short because the process actually speeds up as it goes along. Early detection and cold, moderate dry storage are the best defenses against continued decay. Jeff's warehouse in San Jose, while not air-conditioned, was not a bad climate for storing films, as San Jose has a pretty mild climate. However, the Library Services Center, where the films now are housed, is actually the ideal place to store films, as it remains cool and dry all year long. In addition, thanks to Film and Media Studies, we bought a very beautiful, very large industrial freezer. We store the most damaged films in the freezer until we can digitize them. Luckily, when we accepted the film gift, it came with a very detailed database from Jeff in which he noted various condition issues. We did an analysis of these issues and have grouped them into categories where preservation through digitization would be highly desirable. I brought along an example to show you today of a film that needs intervention to continue to be used. This film, Desert's Living Sands, has sprocket damage, is turning red, and has started to smell like vinegar. Yeah. See here, it's buckling just a little bit. You can see along the edges. And again, it has just the slightest smell of vinegar. It is films like these that we hope to have your help in helping us digitize.
When Jeff's collection first arrived, we were lucky to have a postdoctoral fellow working with us to analyze the collection. Something that the fellow and I noticed is that the existing Internet Archive collection of digitized films had distinct thematic threads, specific subjects and film styles that would be useful collectively to faculty members and researchers of academic film. Our analysis made clear that building the streaming options by theme would be a great way to prioritize our work. For example, there are many animated films that would be of great interest to researchers, such as, for example, works by Les Goldman and Gerald McDermott. Similarly, the collection includes documentary films by many filmmakers, such as Yvonne Anderson and William Deneen. Both documentary film and animation are of great interest to filmmakers and film historians. There are also subject groupings that make good sense to build upon, such as science education and world history. By strategically building this digital collection by subject and prioritizing those subsets by physical condition, we will both make the films available to JHU scholars across the curriculum and help physically preserve the important collection. And yet another way we're approaching streaming priorities is by working with specific JHU faculty members teaching with archival film. For example, I've begun planning a project with Jimmy Roche, a faculty member who is teaching a class next year about found footage films. Jeff's collection is a treasure trove for this type of class. Supporting projects like this is a fantastic way to bring Jeff's collection directly into the classroom.
Digitizing films requires some additional work behind the scenes to be done before it becomes available for viewing. We must do research around the film's copyright, enhance the metadata to ensure proper discovery, pack and track the film, ship the film, and store the digital files, among other things. The pricing structure we came up with for the Adaptive Film Digitization Program includes all that work plus the actual cost of digitization, which is based on runtime. To adopt a film for digitization, the pricing is for a 0 to 10 minute film, $459, for an 11 to 20 minute film, $619, for a 21 to 30 minute film, $779, for a 31 to 40 minute film, $939. Over a 40 minute film, we'll have to talk. And if you want, to digitize all of them, I can give you a great deal, and we can really talk about how we can make that happen. We hope you consider helping us preserve and make available this amazing material by adopting a film for digitization.
And if you want to learn more about the thematic threads and other subject groups represented in the collection, please reach out to us. It'll be really fun to brainstorm and find something particularly interesting to you. So
thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for this year's Adopt a Book program. We're happy to join you today now, totally live and completely unrehearsed. So we're here to answer any of your questions you might have on these wonderful items that were showcased through this program. If you haven't done so, we encourage everyone watching live today to leave your questions in the chat below. And if you already have, feel free to ask another. We'll try our best to answer all the questions we can. So without further ado, I think the first one was for Sam.
Thanks, Liz. So the first question I see is from Cindy. And Cindy asks, were there other drag-style vaudeville performers that were widely popular besides Elting? Yes, this is a great question. And Elting had several peers and competitors who performed in very different styles. One was Bert Savoy, who took a more campy parody approach to his performance. There was another named Harry Lair, who was known for being even more outrageous, apparently showing up to a gala dressed as the Tsar of Russia. There was also a well-known male impersonator named Vesta Tilley, who was a star on both the English and the American stages. But it does seem that Elting was the most successful. In the book I mentioned by Erdman, he argues that, among other reasons, the two main ones were that, one, Elting took his performances extremely seriously, and the second was that he actually reinforced traditional gender roles by being hyper-feminine on stage and hyper-masculine off stage. Apparently, he even spread tales to the newspapers about being hot-tempered and even violent if you insulted him, telling a newspaper a completely fabricated story about how he had beat up a man who insulted him backstage. And he would also talk quite a bit about wrestling and boxing and playing football.
Thank you. I think the next two are for Mac.
I see here is from Vince. He asked, all the prints in these books are so beautiful. Are these available to look through online? In some cases, yes. I'm not sure, Vince, if you were referring to the Antiquities of Athens, but in this case, yes, this book does exist in what we call a digital surrogate, a scan. Because of how old it is in the public domain. It is no longer bound by copyright, so it can be consulted in some digital forms. I should mention, though, however, especially with a book like The Antiquities of Athens, I have yet to find a digital surrogate that does any amount of justice to the works itself, because, as Jennifer very eloquently conveyed, there's a lot more here than what you're seeing. This is a tangible, luxurious experience in I think all of the books I selected, certainly. So it's a lot more than just an image that appears on the screen. And this is a lesson we all learned during the COVID-19 pandemic when we didn't have recourse to special collections. And when we were able to get back into the classroom, we all realized very quickly, oh, that this is necessarily a tangible experience, which I think is why these materials in their physical form they don't really hold up against, or rather the digital surrogates don't really hold up against the physical forms. So even though they do exist, that there is necessarily a tangible component that we try to emphasize in teaching with these in person. Second question I received is from Barbara, following on the online question. Can you make an appointment to see these amazing items in special collections? Yes. Members of the community can make appointments to view items in special collections. I have asked our organizers at Hopkins at Home to include the link in the chat to where you can register and make an appointment to view these items. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Mac. Jennifer, I think the next one is for you from Vince.
Sure. Vince asked, did the materials for this book come from a lot of places besides Russia? Was there areas of good for paper and areas good for inks, or was it more common to source more locally? So curious about the trade and manufacturing. Seems similar to how we build things today. Yes and no. Generally speaking, it would be more economical to source things as locally as possible. So, for example, one way to kind of match or kind of feel more certain about whether a book's binding matches the place where it was printed is to look at the skin, the type of animal that was used to cover it. So usually you would find books covered in the skins of animals that people in that region would eat, for example. So if your culture ate a lot of goat meat, you would be more inclined to cover your books in goat skin. Um, but for things like paper and ink, that was fairly local, although of course you have to have, for example, for paper, you have to have sources of clean water. So paper mills were always located along rivers. So it is kind of a mixture. A lot of like stylistically, a lot of things would come to us from elsewhere. So for example, the use of marbled paper in book bindings, older book bindings comes to Western Europe, I should say, from the Islamic world. Um, so the, and then the artisans in Europe would have learned that trade and executed it themselves, but it was not indigenous to to Europe at the time, if that makes sense. So it was kind of a mixture in terms of importing goods and materials for these bindings, and also using what was locally available. Hope that
Great.
answered your question.
Thanks, Jennifer. So the next question is for Jennifer Endermack from Owen about the possible cost of this kind of book.
Yeah, I can go ahead and answer that. We are just starting our research in all aspects of this volume. So I can't tell you exactly how much a subscriber would have paid for this volume at the time. But if we do figure it out, we should post it and make that information available. I will say that oftentimes what the subscribers would have been paying for in this subscription fee would have only been for the text block or the book and the printed matter itself. So you would have picked up or paid for the book in sheets and then taken it to a binder of your choosing to have the binding on it that you either could afford or that you desired to match your library at home or whatever your wishes were. So that's why I had a quick look online to see what other libraries owned copies of this book, and none of them were in the same bindings, which is not surprising.
Great, thank you. Don, I'm going to let you answer at least the first part of this question, but I have something to add afterwards from Cindy.
Yeah, great. This is a question from Cindy asking, who made all these academic films? Were they produced by studios or the government or independent? I assume the answer is all of the above, but are there any super prolific ones? Well, I think you have answered your own question a bit. It is quite an eclectic group. Um, it it does have sort of independent foundations that funded these things, studios, different educational institutions, and also um, things like local TV stations, regional TV stations that created these as well. And then there are others that are kind of big that were produced by Encyclopedia Britannica, for example, that put out a bunch of educational films that would be used in the classroom. So that's my understanding of it. But when you look through this list, which I do have a gigantic spreadsheet that Jeff provided. You can look by the company that produced it or distributed it. It's very, very eclectic and broad reaching. So that's my answer.
So I wanted to add something here that I've been finding very interesting is that since we acquired this collection, the filmmakers have found out that this collection has found a home at Johns Hopkins, and they have been many have reached out to Jeff and have said that they have archives themselves about their making of these films, and have now been reaching out to us to see if we want to add these filmmaker archives to our collection, which I think is a pretty amazing complement to the films themselves, to be able to see the history of then how the films were made and what these filmmakers were thinking about at the time. So this is it's a pleasant surprise from actually getting this collection in.
And
So,
actually
oh,
related to that, if you don't mind, a lot of these filmmakers, this might have been some of their early work or the work they did on the side to make some money, and they were making other films, oftentimes independent films, experimental films, Hollywood films. So yeah, these filmmakers do. Many of them are interestingly significant. So just to throw that in too.
so our next question is for anyone, but I think I'll have Mac, Don, and Sam kind of address it. Is what is lost or gained when a rare book is digitized?
That's a wonderful question. And I'll start by noting, I think what is gained, that this isn't often talked about as much. And I think the first is accessibility. We're all able to avail ourselves of rare resources online that are no longer in copyright, such as Stewart's Antiquities of Athens. So, for instance, I talked about the COVID-19 pandemic. The flip side of that coin is that we all had to rely a lot more on these digital surrogates, and these help to keep research and teaching going at a time when we did not have access to the original printed material. So there is a huge upside, and I don't want to understate that at all to digital surrogates, but there is a lot lost in terms of the tangibility, as we've already discussed. One point I'll just note with the volume, and Jennifer again did a really nice job of conveying this, but I just want to emphasize the fact that the binding is bespoke for an item like this. This can tell you as much about the work as the text block itself. And this is something that is very rarely capable of digitization in all of its forms as a three-dimensional object. And I'll be delighted to hear if there are other examples that my colleagues have about this great question.
Yeah, I totally agree, Mac. We obviously gain access to these materials outside of our archive. And I agree, you lose that sense of kind of physical touch when you're working with an object. I think the only thing I might add, from my perspective, working with a very large digitized collection, which is the Lester Levy sheet music collection, it's about 30,000 digitized popular American songs, which are available for free online, is that in addition to having digitized the covers and the music, is we have a lot of data as well. We have the title of the songs, we have the year they were published. And when you have all of this data, there's a lot more research that you can do to really parse through this data in different ways.
Yeah, and I'll just speak up a little bit too. I completely agree with my colleagues. They having the digitized access broadens it, but also I've noticed in classroom settings themselves, I have an example. We have a very beautiful, fine facsimile of a medieval book of hours or early modern book of hours by one of the French queens, Jeanne d'Evreux, which was a tiny little book of hours with all of her important things that she wanted to read through every day, scriptures, images, particular things that were important to her. It was this big, and it was designed to fit in her purse or her pocket. I think some of those dresses had pockets. And to have this kind of thing, and it was all hand created with this, what's called a demi-grisaille technique, tiny, really incredible images that can be seen better when they're projected on the screen gigantically and you can zoom in on them. So it's just a good example of having the object with the images in a classroom. You get both of those perspectives. You can zoom in, see excruciating detail, and this is a facsimile, so we can, although it's perfect, it can be sort of passed around and they can get a sense for what she intended when she made this, when she had it made, to have it with her all the time. So just a nice example of how these things go. And I do wonder, though, back to what might be lost, and this might be a question for Jennifer. Sometimes when we have to be very, very careful with rare and big materials, like some of the stuff that Jennifer and Max showed, that when we're digitizing them, they have to be handled so delicately. And I think sometimes the loss might happen inadvertently, and not often, and probably not at all among our staff. But it's one of those considerations of the. I'm sure there are times where we look at something and say we can't digitize that because it would be too damaged.
Yeah, Don, I'll just and wrap this up if needed by saying that you're correct. Our digitization team is excellent, and we do, where needed, assist them if there's something particularly delicate when they are digitizing it. I will say that I have worked in places where volumes were sent off to like Google for digitization for the Google Books project, and they would often come back in pieces and basically wrecked. So it does need to be done by professionals, and there are certain circumstances where yes, you either would not be able to digitize a book in its current condition. That's why often our conservation projects, like for the Antiquities of Athens, would go along with digitization, because if the book is in a state of being repaired, it's often easier at that point to make a high quality digital surrogate, and hopefully one that Mac approves of. So that's kind of our plan.
Great. There's another question here from Kate, who asks, how else can we support the work you're all doing beyond adopting one of the books? And Kate, that's a wonderful question. And we have many opportunities for people to help us. But we really like to be able to work with you and to see where your interests lie. For example, right now, the library is undergoing a lot of renovation, and we have a lot of naming opportunities for spaces that might suit what you like. But feel free to give us a call and let's talk, and we can figure out where your interests lie and how we can work together. So Jennifer, Claire wants to know when they can see your finished conservation project.
Yeah, so we do, especially for folks who adopt books, we are definitely engaged as much as you wish in the process, and would be happy to have you visit the lab while we're working on the conservation treatment, and then certainly after it's finished. We've done that many times in the past, and we have a number of adopters who are visitors to the lab from time to time.
And I think our final question here is, how many books or materials does the library buy in a year? Do you keep an eye out for new things to add to the collection year round? So to answer that, for the second part, yes. Our librarians and curators are constantly looking for things to add to the collection based on the research and teaching needs of our faculties and scholars. So it is definitely a year-round kind of thing that we do. It's a lot of fun, and we do get a lot of good things in. In terms of numbers, that's probably a little harder to talk about because we get so many different types of things. We get books, we get streaming video, we get journal subscriptions, we get electronic books. So all in all, the numbers are a little more harder to define. I think in terms of just, we break things down like general collections, special collections, electronic stuff. So we have all that kind of broken down, but probably we're adding somewhere between 28 to 50,000 volumes of kind of monographs, either print or electronic, every year. And then we have literally thousands of electronic journals every year that we get every year that we subscribe to. And our collection of streaming videos is growing. And now we have this I'm going to put one more plug in for our lovely collection of 16mm films that is also growing. So the collection continues to grow every year because that's what libraries do as we collect materials that support our research here. So thank you everyone for these questions. We really appreciate it. And if you have other questions, we're always happy to answer them. I would also like to thank Don, Jennifer, and Sam and Mac for their work contributing to the program and the generosity of time that they gave us, and our wonderful production team that made us look so good. And then everyone who tuned in today for our conversation. We encourage you to take a moment to explore the collection online and consider supporting our acquisitions and digitization programs. If you need holiday gift ideas, these could be perfect for your friends and family. A printable certificate would be available, and you can, add that to a holiday card. So if you'd like to share or rewatch the program, it will be made available on the Hopkins at Home website and the JHU YouTube page in the coming days. We hope you have a wonderful weekend and a great Thanksgiving, and we look forward to seeing you next year from more lunch with the libraries and museums. So thanks so much for your attention.